Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the greatest show on earth. It's the Take Your Shot podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gitman, and we are just rolling through things here on this wonderful Wednesday. And the Boston Celtics did it. After 16 years, they are your NBA champions, led by Jason Tatum and finals MVP Jaylen Brown. The Celtics were the most dominant team all season long, 64-16 in the regular season, pretty much cruised through every team in the league. The only team that they were not 500 against, below 500 against, was the Denver Nuggets. They pretty much were 500 or above against every other team. They went 16-3 in their playoff run, only 3 losses, one in each series, excluding the conference finals, which they swept. And they arguably cruised through the league this year. And for all the doubts that Jason Tatum, for all the doubts that Jaylen Brown have had, they did it. They completed the mission. They got it done. They are the 2024 NBA champions. And in today's episode, we will discuss how this team should be remembered. Which person, player, executive deserves the most credit? Did Jaylen Brown deserve the finals MVP? And of course, the Mavericks season, along with the Celtics for that matter, is over. So we discuss what they need to do in the offseason. And then two more things that I'm really excited to talk about are the Celtics going to be a potential dynasty? And did they pass the Lakers as the greatest NBA franchise in the history of basketball? We will get to all of that, and it is going to be an exciting conversation to have. But I first want to start with how this team should be remembered, because this team, they had a lot of ups and downs overall in the season. There was highs of highs when they were going on 16 game winning streaks, and then there was lows of lows, like the end of the season, back-to-back losses to the Hawks, for example, losing consecutive game twos at home in the postseason, having them worry if they can pretty much protect home court. There have been highs and lows for the Celtics team, and you have to look at a lot of the highs and just see how great of a basketball team this really was from top to bottom. Their entire rotation, just dominant, just great, and overall historic. And let's start with the bench. The bench was something that was a little bit questionable. If we had to choose one flaw about the Celtics, one thing that might kill them, one thing that might come to bite them at the end of the season, it was their bench. It was the depth, because other than their first six, who else? Who else was there going to be? There was unproven guys on that bench, and someone, at least one, probably two, had to step up. And two did. Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard. Those two off the bench silence the questions about the Boston Celtics depth, because whenever maybe Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown had to be out of the game, maybe Drew Holiday, Porzingis needed a little bit of a breather, you had those two to come in and continue what the Celtics do best: shoot threes. That is the Celtics game, and those two did it to perfection. And maybe they had some off games. Maybe they weren't confident in themselves 100% of the time, but those two came in with high expectations off the bench for a team that obviously has the expectation of winning an NBA championship, has the desire, has the goal to win an NBA championship, and is clearly a top 3 roster in the league, if not a top 1 roster in the league. Those two came in, did their roles. Peyton Pritchard, not only was he great offensively, but we had questions about Peyton Pritchard on the defensive side of the ball. There was very, very, there was various arguments that were telling Joe Mazzulla to be like, why put Peyton Pritchard in? Why put him in the game? Because he doesn't play great defense. We saw it in past playoffs. We've seen it in past regular seasons. Players went at Peyton Pritchard. Players tried to do whatever it took to get Peyton Pritchard on them. That's what teams were trying to do. And Peyton Pritchard had a much improved defensive season this year. Peyton Pritchard had the best season of his career. And when it is time, Peyton Pritchard will get his recognition, and he should get a lot of recognition this year, and he will continue to improve and continue to get more recognition. He already signed his extension with Boston. He's locked up with the Celtics, and what was kind of crazy now that I think about it while I'm talking was Peyton Pritchard requested a trade a couple years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Peyton Pritchard was disappointed in his role with the Celtics, not playing because we've seen Pritchard's offensive abilities at times. He's great on that side, but he's such a liability on defense, and there's such high expectations with being with this team that there just wasn't a lot of room for him to play. And especially last year with most of the depth there before the trades, you had Malcolm Brogdon last year to play. There was more leeway to potentially not play Peyton Pritchard, but now you have to play him. And Peyton Pritchard got his chance. He got his opportunity like he asked, and he successfully did his job. And give a lot of credit to Peyton Pritchard. And then Sam Hauser, a very young guy, someone who really didn't have that much of an impact his rookie year. Second year in the league now, a great shooter off the bench for Boston, stretches the floor, opens up the Celtics a little bit more. And he also stepped up defensively as well because he was a little bit of a liability defensively as well for most of the regular season. But in the finals, along with Pritchard, great defense. Those two guys off the bench were huge for the Celtics, and they really silenced the doubters of whether the Celtics will have a bench. Then you go to a guy like Derek White. Derek White was acquired in 2022 by the Celtics. Derek White was really a nobody. Nobody knew who Derek White was in San Antonio. People knew about him around the league, but people didn't really know how special the guy could be, how much of an impact the guy could bring. And he goes to Boston immediately. 2022 playoff run, makes a huge impact, ramps up offensively, even though he was coming off the bench. He did that for the Celtics. He was a reason why the Celtics got to the finals in 2022, why the Celtics got to the conference finals in 23. Derek White has been a glue guy for the Celtics team ever since he was acquired, both offensively stepping up his game immensely on that side of the ball and defensively. And you couldn't tell me that there is any guard in the league that is a better shot blocker currently than Derek White. Derek White hunts, attacks, and finds ways to block on defense. And it's something that I really haven't seen since maybe even a Dwayne Wade, even a Michael Jordan was in the league. That is something that is very special to do, be an elite shot blocker as a guard, because Derek White, for how tall he is, 6'5", he's probably one of the top 3 shot blockers in the league. And I'm not even joking. Not even joking on that part. That is how crazy Derek White is at defense. That is how crazy Derek White is at finding ways to block basketballs. It is incredible what he does on that side. But he's also been one of those guys who maybe Boston's not hitting a lot of shots. Maybe Boston's in a shooting slump. Derek White makes the timely shots. Derek White is the guy who makes the timely plays. He does the little things for the Celtics team. And that is something that not a lot of players are capable of doing. You got to let the stars thrive. And then there's got to be other guys who are willing to do the little things. And Derek White has done that for the past 3 years. And you could literally see in game 5, dives onto the floor, loses his teeth. He chipped his teeth. I don't know if he's going to need 5 hours of dental surgery after that one. But you just, by that play, can see what Derek White does, his impact on the Celtics team, and he deserves all the praise and all the glory. Then you've got a guy like Drew Holiday, someone who was similar to Derek White. The Boston Celtics were really missing after they traded Marcus Smart for Porzingis, really trying to find someone who's like Marcus Smart, someone to potentially replace Marcus Smart, someone to be that guy for the Celtics, someone to provide leadership, someone who's been there already, someone who's won an NBA title with the Milwaukee Bucks before. That was Drew. And what Drew Holiday does defensively, it's just something that Not a lot of players are capable of doing. Drew Holiday, in my opinion, is personally the best perimeter defender in the league. And Drew Holiday had to make a sacrifice for the Celtics. He had to do something that really some players would be uncomfortable in doing, because remember, Drew Holiday was the second scoring option, in my opinion, in the with the Milwaukee Bucks. You could say it's Chris Middleton, maybe they're tied, but essentially the second best option on the Milwaukee Bucks for scoring. Drew Holiday now goes to a place in Boston where now you've got Tatum and Brown, of course. You've got Porzingis just acquired, and you've got Derek White. Drew Holiday had to make sacrifices this season. Drew Holiday had to be one of those guys who had to sacrifice in order for the Celtics team to work, in order for the Celtics team to be what they are. And that's what it takes with the championship team. You need one or two guys to sacrifice, give up some of what they do for the greater good of the team. And that's something that Drew Holiday did. And that shows his character, because Drew Holiday is someone that would absolutely do that. Yes, he didn't have a great offensive season, but that's because he sacrificed. And in the playoffs, when Porzingis was out and when Boston needed a little bit more offense, when Tatum was struggling game one and game two of the finals, when the Celtics needed a little bit more offense, you know who was there ready to score the ball like he never got away from it? Drew Holiday. That guy is a champion, a two-time champion for that matter, and was a huge part defensively for the Celtics, helping guard the best player, giving Tatum and Brown not essentially breaks defensively, but not having to guard the best player. So some of their stamina, some of their energy could be saved offensively. That is something that Drew Holiday does. Provide the Celtics with defense, save the best players in town. Tatum and Brown, some energy for offense, and let them take the realms over offensively. That was a huge acquisition, and I love Marcus Smart, but that was an upgrade. And the Celtics really found someone who will be a part of this team for a very long time in Drew Holiday. And I think they did get the extension done with Drew Holiday earlier this season, and he will continue to be that defensive juggernaut for Boston while being ready offensively. And that is the beauty of Drew Holiday. He can be ready for whatever you ask upon him. So congrats to Drew Holiday for being a two-time NBA champion now. And then Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis was someone that was unproven, really, to be quite honest. Of course, he got drafted by the Knicks, didn't really work out there with Carmelo, got traded to Dallas. They had opportunities, 2020 in the bubble, didn't really work out there, had some problems with Luka chemistry wise. Then he got traded to Washington. Obviously, Porzingis does not want to be in Washington. Washington's in a rebuilding state. So and he wanted to go to Boston. He got his wish and he got traded to Boston. And people were questioning that. People did not believe Porzingis was going to be the guy to revolve this Celtics offense. Porzingis really wasn't proven. He didn't show up in big moments, whether that was in the postseason with Dallas or with the Knicks. And to be quite honest, he wasn't even there with the Knicks. So he didn't even have opportunities to be in big moments. But Porzingis, essentially, what I'm trying to say is, hadn't proved it on the big stage. And now, of course, with the Celtics, you're going to be on the big stage. You are a contender. You are projected to be the best team in the East. You are going to be on that stage. And when he was perfect. He evolved the Celtics offense. He stretched out defenders. What he did was, when Tatum and Brown drive to the basket, instead of them having to be collapsed by defense and try to check up and force up a shot, instead, if the defense collapses, Porzingis is going to be out there on the perimeter for a 3-point shot, because that's what Porzingis does. He stretches out defenses. And if you collapse, you're screwed. So now, basically, if they do collapse on Tatum and Brown, wide open three to Porzingis, they don't. Tatum and Brown can usually beat a defender one-on-one. Porzingis opened up the floor for Tatum and Brown while stretching out the defense at the same time. And that was a missing piece for Boston. And when you look at feisty defensive teams in the East, like the Bucks, like the Heat, who they had problems with in the past, They did stop Jason Tatum, stop Jaylen Brown. That's all you had to essentially do on the Celtics because you couldn't really trust anybody else offensively. But now that Porzingis was in the mix, it's a whole different universe. It's a whole different like galaxy realm because he's just another offensive threat. And if you double Tatum or Brown, you're essentially screwed because Porzingis is a deadly 3-point shooter as a big man. And that's the beauty of the Celtics bringing him in because now basically all five guys on the court with White, Brown, Brown, Tatum, Holiday, and Porzingis are all pretty decent 3-point shooters. So that was something that really gave the Celtics spark. And Porzingis, when he was healthy, of course, especially in game one of the NBA Finals, really showed that he was in it to win it and he was ready for the moment. And then finally, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Those two have been together for 7 years. They've made the conference finals. Brown 6 out of 8 years. Tatum 5 out of 7 years. They made the finals in 2022. Disappointing NBA finals performances. Didn't get the job done. 2023. Back to the conference finals. Game 7 at home. A chance to go back to the finals and redeem yourselves. Lose at home to a team you probably shouldn't have lost to in the Heat. All the pressure in the world was on those two players, on those two gentlemen. All of it. People were starting to question, can Tatum and Brown do it together? Are they the correct fit together? Can they be teammates? That was a question that was in the air. And they delivered. They silenced the critics, they silenced the haters. And maybe for Jason Tatum, more with him, he didn't win Finals MVP. It doesn't matter. He's a champion. They got the job done. It took them a while, but remember, did MJ win his first championship in 3 years? No, it took time. And that's the beauty of the Celtics title this season. It's not like a Denver who won it in like their second or third playoff run. This title for the Celtics, this roster, mostly Tatum and Brown, it took them 7 playoff runs. It took them a long time. It took them a lot of failures, a lot of disappointments in order to climb to the mountaintop. That's a beauty of this NBA championship. They had to fail. They had to be doubted. They had to go through immense amount of pressure and people did not know if they would deliver, if they would execute, if they would get it done. But those two gentlemen deserve all the praise, all the flowers, because those two silenced everyone and are NBA champions. And maybe it wasn't perfect throughout the playoff run, maybe it wasn't perfect throughout the regular season, but in the closeout games in the postseason, in games where the Celtics needed to win, those two both were there and those two both delivered. And that is what makes two great players. That is what makes Hall of Famers delivering when your team needs you the most, putting your team on your back no matter who's surrounding you and taking them to the promised land. And that is something that is very difficult to do, especially against the Mavericks, who you could make the case had the best player in the series. And most of the time, when you pick an NBA Finals, most people lean toward the best player in the series. But this team, this Celtics team, was different. This Celtics team was great. Their first 6 guys, and obviously, as I mentioned, include Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard, top to bottom, one of the greatest rosters we've seen in years. Probably the greatest, in my opinion, since the 2017 2018 Dynasty Warriors with KD, Steph, Clay, Draymond. You know that roster. That roster was legendary, and they are going to run it back next year, and they are going to be special. This Celtics team, only one word, great. There's been some good champions. Denver was a good champion. The 2019 Raptors were a good champion. This Celtics team, top to bottom, start to finish of the NBA season, were the most dominant team in the league. This Celtics team, it may be simple, it may be simplistic, but the word is great, greatness, because that's what the Celtics team did, and that is what they accomplished climbing to the mountaintop. And who deserves the most credit of that playoff run? Who deserves really the most of the praise, most of the glory? You got to give a lot of credit to Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Those two were great. But the guy I want to give a lot of credit to, someone who is in the front office, the president of basketball operations, Brad Stevens. This Celtics team in 2021 was, when Brad Stevens was the head coach, was coming off essentially a gentleman's sweep against the Brooklyn Nets, essentially against the next dynasty in the NBA. Obviously, Brooklyn wasn't the dynasty that they were supposed to be, but they lost to the Nets. And Brad Stevens stepped down and became president, stepped down as coach, became president, and the Celtics knew they weren't good enough. The Celtics knew that changes needed to be made. And it continued just to start 2022. If you don't remember, in 2022, the Celtics were 500. They were a 500 team. They were a play-in team in January. Then they just started finding ways to win. And that started with Brad Stevens' first trade, getting Derek White from the San Antonio Spurs for Josh Richardson, Romeo Langford, who was essentially a lottery bust for the Celtics, and a first-round pick. What a trade by Brad Stevens, because I mentioned the impact of Derek White. That dude was incredible all season long for the Celtics. 2022 helped them get to a finals. That was a perfect executed trade, and the Celtics started winning, and they got the second seed, and they made the NBA Finals. 2023, traded for Malcolm Brogdon. Looked like a pretty good trade at this time, and he was great. He was the sixth man of the year, but they lost to the Heat in 7. He didn't think that was good enough. So what did Brad Stevens do? There was an original Kristaps Porzingis trade that was going to send Malcolm Brogdon to the Clippers, some stuff, Clippers expiring to Washington, and then Washington obviously gives Porzingis to Boston. That trade didn't go through, and teams didn't want Malcolm Brogdon for Porzingis. Teams wanted Marcus Smart, and Marcus Smart was the heart and soul of the Celtics for 9 seasons. Marcus Smart was the glue guy. Marcus Smart was the guy that provided leadership, gave Tatum and Brown confidence, really gave it his all every single game. And I really feel bad for Marcus Smart. That's the guy with the Celtics championship who I feel worst about. But Brad Stevens did something that not a lot of GMs would have the guts to do. Trade a fan favorite, someone who Boston adored, someone who Boston loved, for the better of the team. And it was questioned. It was definitely questioned, including myself. I didn't understand the trade because I said Porzingis hadn't proved it. And he didn't until this season. And then, maybe with a little bit of luck, Drew Holiday's on the market. And as a potential replacement to Marcus Smart, something that people were questioning during the Porzingis trade, losing a glue guy like that, a defensive specialist like that. And then there's another one on the trade market, someone who's probably better at what Marcus Smart does, and Drew Holiday. Of course, Brad Stevens did it. He traded Malcolm Brogdon, the sixth man of the year. He traded a young and developing center who had all-star potential in Robert Williams, and he got Drew Holiday. Brad Stevens built this roster. He made their roster great. And I forgot to mention, how did Al Horford get back to Boston? because Brad Stevens traded Kemba Walker, a point guard who wasn't really working out with the Celtics, really having the worst season of his career after having led great seasons, all-star seasons with the Hornets. He did that as well. Brad Stevens, in the past few years, has been the best executive in the league, and it is not even close. The trades he has made to make the Celtics team historically great, historically dominant, is something that should not be forgotten. And the best part is, if Boston can get their finances right, this team is going to be around for the next couple of years. This Celtics team is not going away. This Celtics team is here. They are going to be here for the long term. They are coming right back next year, favorites of the East, and they might be back for 3 to 4 years. Stevens did that, and he got put in this role. He wanted to do this role after Danny Ainge left for Utah. Didn't have any experience as a president of basketball ops, goes in immediately and makes this team great. And he doesn't want to be recognized on camera, doesn't want any of the praise, any of the glory. He credits that to his basketball team, as he should. But Brad Stevens deserves an enormous amount of credit for why the Celtics team is where they are today. I want to move on, though, to the Finals MVP because there were some questions about the Finals MVP. I talked about this earlier on my podcast a couple of episodes ago because Jaylen Brown was playing great. Tatum wasn't playing great. Then in the last couple of games, Jason Tatum all of a sudden started to play great. Jason Tatum in Game 3 had 31. Jason Tatum, Game 5, the closeout game, had 31. Even in the Game 4 where they got destroyed, Jason Tatum led the Celtics in scoring with 15. And yes, it's not all about scoring, but Jason Tatum shot the ball much better. Instead of being in the 20s and 30s, he shot in the mid to high 40s, shooting percentage-wise, more efficient there. He was just as efficient distributing the ball with his assists and grabbing boards, yet he was elevating his scoring. So now there was questions about who should be Finals MVP. And this Finals MVP, when the trophy was announced, there was doubts. This is like the first time in probably ever since the Andre Iguodala NBA Finals that there was questions about who would win the Finals MVP. Nobody really knew. Could have been Tatum, could have went to Brown. And of course it did go to Brown, but you could have made the case for Jason Tatum. And heck, you could have even made an argument for Jrue Holiday because that just shows how great this Celtics roster is. And you know what? It would have been perfect. I forgot who said it. Oh, Brian Windhorst said it of ESPN. If Tatum got 5, Brown got 5, and Jrue Holiday got 1 vote because there was 11 voters for Finals MVP, and they would have split the Finals MVP. That would have been great, and that would have been perfect. Of course, we didn't get that. Jaylen Brown won the vote 7-4, but that would have been perfect in my opinion. But if I had to choose one, if my life was on the line, I would choose Jaylen Brown as well, and I agree with the vote. Number 1, consistency. Jaylen Brown was consistent throughout the NBA Finals. Tatum was probably a little bit better in games 3, games 5. But Jaylen Brown was consistent all NBA Finals. 22 game 1, 21 game 2, 30 game 3, 21 game number 5. Jaylen Brown brought it every single game. Shot the ball great from the field every single game in the 50s for most of it. Game 5, not really as great shooting-wise, but still got his points. Real impactful defensively, getting steals and blocks. Brown was more consistent than Jason Tatum, and I like awarding consistency. That's just my personal opinion. If someone plays a little bit better for 1 or 2 games, but this other guy is great throughout 5 games, you got to give it to the guy who's been consistent. Consistency, in my opinion, is key, and that is most definitely a reason why I think Jaylen Brown deserves Finals MVP. And number 2, defensively. The defense that this man played on Luka Doncic was incredible. I was surprised, quite honestly, that Joe Mazzulla decided to put Jaylen Brown on Luka Doncic. I thought Mazzulla was going to put Drew Holiday on Doncic with Derek White, or maybe Jaylen Brown on Kyrie Irving. But I didn't think that Joe Mazzulla would trust Jaylen Brown to get that assignment. Because to be quite honest, last couple of seasons before this one, Jaylen Brown wasn't great defensively. Getting into some foul trouble, getting beat a little bit. He wasn't that great defensively, but this season, this NBA Finals, Jaylen Brown was the best player defensively. And yes, Doncic got his buckets, of course. Doncic was Doncic. He's great. But in the fourth quarter, when it mattered the most, Luka Doncic didn't shoot the ball that great. Luka Doncic wasn't great in the fourth periods of this series. And it's not because he had open looks and missed it. It's because he was harassed on defense by Jaylen Brown. It was because Jaylen Brown picked up 94 feet. His intensity on Luka Doncic was unmatched. And Tatum was guarding the centers on defense. And yes, Tatum did a great job, considering that the centers weren't really much of a big threat until Game 4 and a little bit of Game 5 in this NBA Finals. But Jaylen Brown getting that task of Luka Doncic and maybe not stopping him, but containing him from having one of those Luka legendary performances, having a 40, 45-point game, leading his team to victory. That's hard to do. That is very difficult of a task to do because we know the abilities of a Luka Doncic. We know that he is a top 2, top 3 player in this league. And Brown stepped up to the task. And what Brown said to Mazzulla was, oh, he's here for the moment. Because Jaylen Brown told Mazzulla he was mic'd up for this in the finals. When Luka's in, I want to be in. I want that assignment personally. That is incredible to say. It shows you that Jaylen Brown was built for the moment. Jaylen Brown was here. Jaylen Brown was ready to play and ready to perform and try his best defensively to contain Luka. And that's all you can ask for from a star player. And his consistency and his defense, to me, really elevated his case of being the Finals MVP. But before we transition to some of the more exciting, some of the more interesting topics here, I want to get to the lights out segments for Dallas and Boston. Well, Boston's not really a lights out, but let's start with the Mavericks here. Lights out Dallas Mavericks. Of course, the Mavericks made it to the finals. We're 3 wins away from an NBA championship. Weren't really expected to make the NBA finals, of course. They were the 5th seed in the Western Conference. They beat a tough Clippers team. They beat a young OKC team. Then they upsetted a Minnesota Timberwolves team in the conference finals and got to the finals. And Boston was a little bit too much for them. Dallas, for how good they were, at the end of the day, they still need a little bit more. They still got to have a little bit more to win the NBA Finals. And this draft, they do not have their first round pick. They have a second round pick, the 58th pick in the NBA draft. They have 2 unrestricted free agents, Markieff Morris, and of course the important one, and Derrick Jones Jr. And a priority, in my opinion, for the Dallas Mavericks is to re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. They are a first apron team, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, they're not a first apron team yet. If they do re-sign Derrick Jones, they will be a first apron team. They are in the luxury tax by a little bit, but Dallas is going to have to decide, because Derrick Jones, for how good of a season he had, he may want $12 to $15 million a year in the free agency market. And Dallas is going to have to decide whether that's worth it. And I think personally it is for what Derrick Jones did this season. He developed a three-point shot. He plays great defensively. He's an athletic freak and someone that really was pretty much consistent for the second half of the season on for Dallas. And he's a crucial starter for what the Mavericks have been doing. I think Dallas should definitely re-sign him. I think Derrick Jones should try to find a way to get back to Dallas. But there are going to be teams out there who are going to give Derrick Jones money, and it should be a priority for the Mavericks to find a way to re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. back, get him back on this basketball team. And then unrestricted, they have their 2-way guys, Brandon Williams, Greg Brown, not really worried about those guys. And this offseason, Of course, the number one priority, re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. But as I mentioned, this roster loved what they did. Made the finals, of course. Luka, Kyrie, great. This roster is just not good enough. And although they traded some first round picks in the past, of course, Kyrie Irving trade, couple other trades there that they gave up some firsts. They still have two tradable first round picks in the 2025 and the 2031 draft. They still have opportunities to potentially upgrade this roster. They have 9 guys on this roster who are excluding Kyrie and Luka, who are in that $2 million to $16 million range that they can trade to upgrade, not necessarily get a superstar, but just an upgrade, someone to help the Mavericks just be a better roster. And what I think personally they should do is with the guy like Tim Hardaway Jr., who really wasn't playing most of the late season, someone who's making $15 million a year. He's on an expiring contract. I think they should explore putting Tim Hardaway Jr. in a trade along with maybe a young guy in there and potentially get an upgrade. Maybe get somebody who is another playmaking guard. Maybe get a big man who can space the floor. And someone that I would really like for Dallas going to the floor spacing big man is Kyle Kuzma. Kyle Kuzma, of course, is stuck in Washington right now. And yes, it's an absolute disaster over there in the capital. The Washington Wizards are terrible. Kuzma should probably get out of there as quick as he can. And I think this Mavericks situation for Kuzma, it's all lined up perfectly. In the NBA Finals, we were begging for a guy like Max Akliba to hit some threes because he was getting those open opportunities. He was getting his chances to hit some shots because Luka and Kyrie collapsed the defense, and it leaves the big who can stretch the floor wide open, just like the Celtics with Porzingis. Same situation with the Mavericks, but Kleber wasn't getting it done. And I think the Mavericks are going to need a guy who is better than Kleber, an upgrade from Kleber, and a guy who can play like Kleber. And I think that guy is Kyle Kuzma. And you can give up a first-round pick, maybe a pick swap in there, throw in a Tim Hardaway Jr. expiring along with a young guy. I think if Kyle Kuzma was on this roster along with maybe re-signing Derrick Jones, PJ Washington, and bringing maybe Kyle Kuzma off the bench, maybe bring or Derrick Jones off the bench, whatever Dallas prefers. I don't know what they would do, but I think Kyle Kuzma is someone who can stretch the floor, be someone out there who can just provide a lot of spacing for Dallas. I think that would be a perfect fit. And a scoring guard, I can't really think of a scoring guard right now that they would need, but I think really someone, maybe not a scoring guard per se, but someone who can just be another option out there for Dallas, because what we were obsessing about in the finals, particularly me, I'm like, who else is going to help Kyrie and Luka, especially Luka, because Kyrie wasn't playing that great. But who else is going to help these guys? These role players are doing nothing. They're going to need maybe someone like, I don't know, a guy like Malik Monk. I don't think they can get Malik Monk because he's a free agent, but a guy like him who can just maybe score off the bench. Someone like who Dallas thought Tim Hardaway was going to be. Someone who Dante Exum was for a little bit of the season. You need some guy to help a little bit with the scoring load because Dallas didn't get over 100 points in the finals. They are going to have to find ways to score the basketball, and they need help. And maybe it comes internally with PJ Washington stepping up, a guy like Jaden Hardy developing a little more. Maybe that's part of it. But at the end of the day, you're a contender. You just made the finals. You want to win now. You can't wait for development. You've got to go now. Kyrie's 32. And yes, it's not that old. But at the end of the day, how many opportunities are you going to get? You just made the finals. You've got to do whatever it takes to get back there and get another opportunity for Luka Doncic to win an NBA title. Because trust me, if they don't maximize this roster, things can get ugly with the superstar. So Dallas with Nico Harrison, they're going to have to find ways to upgrade the roster. And Kyle Kuzma is someone I would really like for them. Of course, there's other options to trade, but I'm pretty confident that Dallas is going to make a trade this offseason because, yes, they made the finals. Somehow, somewhere, they got past that wild, wild west. But still, clearly, as you could see in the finals, their roster was not good enough. Their roster needs a little bit more. And it's not something to be disappointed about because, again, the Mavericks had a great season. They made the finals. They weren't expected to be in the NBA finals. They had a great season. But at the end of the day, you're going to need upgrades in order to maximize this Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving championship window. And that starts right now this offseason with getting that stretch big or getting a scoring guard. Now let's go to the Boston Celtics, where it's not really lights out. I called it lights on Celtics because the lights weren't out. They won. Nobody eliminated them. So I guess the lights stay on all offseason. That's what I guess we're going with here. But the Celtics now, of course, go into an offseason where decisions are pretty simple for them. I would say there's one that's particularly tough and a decision that may be a little bit difficult to make, but they do have their first round pick this year. They do have the 30th pick, of course, the last pick in the first round because they were the best team in the league. I'm pretty sure they have most of their first round picks, excluding the ones that they gave up in the Drew Holiday trade to Portland. And they also have their second round pick this year, 54th pick there. So they have two of their draft picks, which is great. They, if I'm not mistaken, they have a couple unrestricted free agents with Xavier Tillman, Luke Cornett, and Cy Mahalik. I can't even pronounce his name. But Xavier Tillman, Luke Cornett, two of the big guys who Celtics relied upon when either Al Horford or Kristaps Porzingis wasn't in there. Maybe they sprained their ankle or something. Those were the guys who were in there for the Celtics. And I don't know if they want to retain those guys. I would probably more lean to retaining Xavier Tillman for what he proved in the NBA Finals because he was great in the Finals, especially without Porzingis in there for a little bit. Tillman was great on defense. Tillman did his job, and he's a very young guy who really Memphis essentially just gave to the Celtics. So I love Luke Cornett, but at the end of the day, I think you might want to go with Xavier Tillman, and I do think you're going to need to re-sign one of those bigs, considering, Al Horford is getting up there in age. He's 38 years old. I don't know if he's going to retire this season. He may want to retire because, of course, you rather go out on top than not. He may do it. I don't think he's going to retire because I think he has 1 year left on his contract. So maybe next year will be his last season. But again, Al Horford's going to retire soon. So again, maybe re-signing one of those guys or maybe trading for a backup big with some of your first round picks. You could do that as well. And that is something that I think is going to be important for the Celtics this offseason because you love Al Horford. You love what he's done. But at the end of the day, he's going to keep progressing. He's going to eventually retire. And you're going to have to find someone to back up Porzingis, be that physical big man who can stretch the floor. Because, again, this is Missoula ball. Missoula and his staff, his team, he likes to stretch the floor. So they are going to have to find a five that can shoot the ball, who can come off the bench, make an impact defensively as well. And that could come internally with Tillman or Luke Cornett. I rather prefer Tillman, or it could become externally by maybe exploring the trade market there. So that is a priority that the Celtics need to look at this offseason. They also have O'Shea Brissett on a player option. He may accept that. He may not. We'll see. He didn't play for the Celtics a lot this season, so we'll see what he does. Team option, Sam Hauser. Obviously, they're going to pick up that. Namanis Keita, we'll see about him. But definitely, of course, Sam Hauser will be on the Boston Celtics next season. And the Celtics have two big contract extensions that they need to focus on now. Jason Tatum, the one that I'm less worried about, 5-year, $350 million. The Celtics probably already put it to the table, and his agent and him are going to sign. Not worried about that one. But that will be the biggest contract in NBA history when he signs that, when he puts the pen to paper. That will be the biggest contract in NBA history. And the Celtics already have what is the current biggest contract in NBA history with Jaylen Brown's 5-year, $304 million contract extension that they did last season. So the money's adding up for the Celtics. And because of that, it makes this next contract extension very interesting. And that next guy is Derek White. Derek White's someone who was impactful, to say the least, for the Celtics. And I don't know how much he's going to want. I don't know his value. But if I'm Derek White, I want $30 million a year. Derek White is a $30 million per year player. He's averaged 16 points on a Celtics team that won the title. Imagine if he gets his own team. Derek White
should want all the money. He deserves all the money, and that's going to make this contract extension interesting because the Celtics are already paying over $100 million in the luxury tax. Do they want to pay more? Do they want more luxury tax penalties? Do they want to continue to be in the second apron? Because remember now, if the Celtics are in the second apron for more than consecutive years, they are going to lose their first round pick every single year that they are in the second apron. Remember that now. So decisions are going to have to be made, and these new apron rules are designed to break up teams like the Celtics, to break up teams who have all these big contracts, are all with their superstars, with all their great players. That these new rules are going to break that up. So this is going to be something that the Celtics are going to have to decide. Do you want to give Derek White that big money? Do you want to give Derek White $30 million just like you gave Drew Holiday? Or are you going to have to sacrifice him? Are you going to have to let him walk? That is a question that really cannot be answered as of now. And those negotiations are going to be long and going to be rough because if I'm Derek White, I want to get paid. I just helped you win a title. I helped you get back to the top of the Eastern Conference. Why wouldn't I want my money? So that is going to be a very interesting extension talk there. And that's pretty much it for the Celtics. They're bringing back their whole roster, and the priority is get Derek White to figure out an extension with him and find a backup big to potentially replace Al Horford this year or next year. Those are the two things that Boston needs to do this offseason. But other than that, they won the NBA title. They're sitting great. They're bringing back their whole roster, as I just mentioned. They will be in a position where they are going to be the undisputed favorites next season. And then now let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's go to the interesting topics to end the show. Of course, the Boston Celtics have passed the Los Angeles Lakers, getting their 18th NBA championship. The Lakers still at 17. And now the question becomes, since the Celtics are now one NBA championship ahead of the Boston Celtics, ahead of the Los Angeles Lakers, are they the best franchise in basketball? Or is it the Lakers? Are the Lakers still the greatest franchise in NBA history, the best franchise in basketball, even though they have one less NBA title? That's a tough question. And I was thinking about things to do, and I'm like, this is a great topic. And this is a very tough question. But ultimately, I'm going to say the Lakers on this one. And it may be a little bit surprising because, championships. But you look at longevity here. The Celtics, not even close, had the best era of all time in basketball in the 1960s. That will never happen again. Winning 8 straight, and 11 out of, what was it, like 12, 13 years? That will never happen again. The Boston Celtics, or any team for that matter, will never do that again. That was a great era. And they won 8 of those titles there. And then, of course, they won some in the 50s. They won a couple in the 70s with Havlicek. But not... And then the 80s, of course, they had 3 with Larry Bird. But other than that, there's been a big gap in the Celtics championships. You look at 86 to 2008, then 2008 to 2024. Those are big gaps. And yes, the Celtics may have the most dominant era in basketball history, but longevity of an NBA franchise, that is the Los Angeles Lakers. Because yes, the Lakers won a couple in Minneapolis, and you could make the question that the Lakers are Los Angeles Lakers. The Los Angeles Lakers haven't won that many championships. They've only won 13. Well, they've won championships. They won 13, but not as much as they did in Minneapolis. They won 5 in Minneapolis. I think they won 12 while they were in Los Angeles, but they did win 5 in Minneapolis. But I'm going to say they're the same franchise. They're still the Lakers. But the Lakers have had it for a while. They were pretty good in the 80s. They were good in the 50s. Both the Celtics and the Lakers weren't really that great in the 70s. 90s both weren't that great. But in the 2000s, I think what is something that puts the Lakers over the top is the Shaq and Kobe Bryant era. Because you look at the 2000s, ever since 2000, where's Boston's dynasty? Where's Boston's dominance? In this century, in this millennium, Boston has not had a dynasty. The Lakers have won 5 championships in this millennium. Actually, 6. Excuse me, 6. I'm forgetting the bubble. 6 in this millennium. The Celtics have won 2. The Shaq and Kobe dominance, while the Celtics were not good, they won 1 title in 2008. In 2010, the Lakers got them back. They were 1-1 in this millennium when they played each other in the NBA Finals. And then you look at Kobe winning 2 in the 2 when they had the big 3, Boston, Garnett, Pierce, Ray Allen. Kobe won more titles in that era. And as of recently, of course, now they're split with the Lakers and the bubble Celtics there. But that Kobe and Shaq era where they won 3 straight really is the sort of the clincher for the Lakers, in my opinion. And then you look at the 80s as well. I forgot to mention, you look at what the 80s were defined of. When we think of the 1980s in basketball, we think of Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. Guess who won more championships? Magic Johnson. Magic and the Lakers, the Showtime Lakers won 5. Larry Bird and the Celtics won 3. Maybe the Celtics had the greatest team of those years in 86. But championship-wise, the Lakers won more in that era. And I'm not saying that Boston should be discredited because Boston deserves their praise. They are a top 2 franchise in basketball history, and that is unarguable. But at the end of the day, consistency. I said this with the Finals MVP, and I'm going to say this with franchises. Consistency, something that you continue, something that you don't stop. You don't stop your dominance at any decade. And they both sucked in the 90s. But in the 80s, the Lakers were better. In this century, the Lakers were better. In the 70s, it was a little bit of a split. In the 60s, of course, the Celtics were by far the greatest, and they had the most dominant era. And then in the 50s, the Lakers were better. The Lakers have been better more decades than the Celtics. The Celtics had a really great decade, the greatest of all time, not even close, in the 60s. But again, consistency. The Lakers have been great for more years. And then you look at individuals as well. The Celtics haven't really had that many great individual players. They've had, since the 2000s, they've had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Antoine Jamison. I mean, but for the Lakers, Shaq, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Paul Gasol, Ron Artest. The Lakers have been better in this millennium, and they have been more consistent with their winning. So I'm going to give the notch to the Lakers. Maybe if the Celtics start a dynasty, they will get there and overtake the Lakers as the best franchise in basketball. But for right now, I got to continue with the Lakers for their consistent dominance, because there was some decades where the Celtics were no-shows. The Lakers were essentially showing up every single decade in basketball. And now back to the dynasty. If the Celtics were to become the greatest franchise of all time, they would need to have a dynasty. And the question is this the start of one? This Celtics team was so great. Is this the start of a new dynasty in the NBA? And before I elaborate on this question a little bit and answer the question, I'm going to tell you what I think a dynasty means. I think a dynasty requires you to win 3 NBA championships in a span of 7 seasons. That's pretty fair, right? 3 titles in 7 seasons, winning essentially almost 40% of the time. That's a dynasty, in my opinion. You could win 4-9. Of course, that's a dynasty as well. But I think 3 titles in 7 years. That's pretty fair, right? The Warriors had 4 in 7 years. But I think a dynasty is something that's longevity. I think that's something that lasts 7-10 years. I think that's what a dynasty is. If you win 3 titles in 7 years, That's, in my opinion, what a dynasty is. And can the Celtics do it? Of course they can. I think they'll win another title in the next 7 years. Do I think they'll get to three, though? Do I think that will happen? It's tough to answer, but I'm gonna say no because number one, we've had six different NBA champions in 6 years now, right? There's a reason why. There is a reason why the NBA is getting great. The NBA, the talent in this league is getting much better. Then you have the new rules. I mentioned this with the lights out Celtics. Eventually, the Celtics are not going to be able to be the same team unless some players take pay cuts. Some players are going to have to leave. And yes, they may replace some other guys, but this roster was great. This roster was required to be great. And another reason, the Eastern Conference was injured all season long. The East was injured this postseason. A lot of the regular season, they didn't really get the challenge. And do I think they still would have won with the Eastern Conference being healthy? Absolutely. I think they still would have won the title. I think it would have been more difficult. Of course, I think that first round against the Heat would have been six. Cleveland could have been six. Indiana, if Halliburton was healthy, that could have lingered. Well, they probably wouldn't have even played Indiana. They probably would have played the Knicks or the Sixers. That could have been 7 games. And then it takes a toll on you. And they probably still would have won the title. But again, the East is injured, and the East is going to get better. And the West is still there as well when they have to get to the finals. Dallas is still going to be there. Remember about Denver. Denver beat the Celtics twice this season. The Celtics have had problems with Denver in the past in the regular season. Then you've got this young rising OKC team. What if they make a move? You've got Minnesota who beat Denver, very young as well, with a rising superstar in Anthony Edwards. You've got Victor Wembanyama in the West. What could the Spurs do in the next 5 years? You've got a young rising team in Houston. The Western Conference is going to be great for the next decade. The East is only getting better as well. You look at what Orlando's doing. They've got a young team there. They can make a move this offseason. What is stopping these teams from getting better and challenging the Boston Celtics? What is? What is really? Teams are going to challenge the Celtics. And it's going to be hard to win every single year because, yes, the Celtics are favorites next year, but I'm going to have to evaluate and think of what teams could do, what team potential moves teams could do. What if OKC goes out? I'm not saying this is realistic, but let's say Kevin Durant's not happy in Phoenix. Let's say OKC says, I'll throw you 5 firsts for KD. They have the assets to do it. There will be another great team form that can challenge Boston. And they didn't really have a challenge in this postseason. And that's not a bad thing. They deserve to be NBA champions. They were the best team in the league, and the best team won the NBA title. But they weren't that challenged this postseason. And that's not a bad thing. But it will be a much more difficult task. That's what I'm saying, to win a title in the next couple years. That's all I'm saying. So I don't think the Celtics will be a dynasty. I think they'll win another one in the next 3 years. I'm pretty convinced about that. But their roster, it's going to be broken up eventually. Teams are going to be on the rise. Teams are coming. The West is coming. The East is coming. Teams are going to challenge the Celtics, and we will see how the Celtics respond. And that, if I'm not mistaken, that will do it for this podcast. Thank you so much for watching the show. It was an absolute incredible NBA season. And when I mean incredible, it was incredible because of you guys. You guys stayed on the ride with me. And it was a long season. It was a hard postseason. And it was just amazing to do this. And I love doing this. And this podcast, you guys, this has been awesome to do. And we're done with one season. And it was a great 23-24 season. And there is more to come. There is definitely more to come. And there will be a lot of stuff to discuss with this podcast, what we're going to do this offseason, what we're going to do to grow, what we're going to do to get better. But it starts with you guys, the original people who decided to watch this show. And we will only get better and more exciting things, more interviews, maybe more frequent guests. They're on the horizon. But I'm so happy we got through the first season with the success and with the bang. Thank you so much once again. It really means a lot. And it would mean even more if you click that like button, subscribe, comment, share on your social media. That would mean even more to me. And tell me, don't forget to tell me how you would have taken your shots on my takes today. That's all my shots for the day. That's all my shots for the 23-24 season. To the 2024 offseason we go. There will be an NBA draft special on the horizon. There will be an NBA free agency special on the horizon. We've got all of that coming and more on the Take Your Shot podcast. And I will see you whenever we have our next episode. Thank you so much again. It means a lot for me. We are one season done, and we are continuing to grow.